Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's the beginning of March, and that means it's time for my monthly tops and flops video, in which I discuss the best and the worst books of the previous month. And before I start, I want to just clarify something because people had asked me in the comments. This is a new video feature series that I started in January, and I'm looking whether that works per month. But some people ask me, what about your recent reads on Sunday? So what I do is I'm still doing my recent reads, but like before, twice a month, depending a little bit on how much I read. But I keep the books that I read that I think will make it into the tops and flops out of the recent reads, so that I don't bore you with repetition all over. And if I, keep a book out of the recent reads because I think it's going to be in the tops and flops and it doesn't end up in the tops and flops in the end, then I will just include it in the next recent reads. Just to clarify. But my best books and worst books of February. And the first book I want to talk to you about is the book that I really loved. It was a 5-star read for me, but it surprised me quite a bit that I loved it so much, and that is Helen DeWitt's debut novel, The Last Samurai, published in 2000. Helen DeWitt is an American author. I have never read anything by her, and this was a buddy read with Adam from Memento Mori, who unfortunately hasn't made any videos lately because of work, and he moved, but that is a month ago, so I think, Adam, it's now really time to come back. Anyway, this book is set in the present, and we follow two main characters, Sibylla, a 30-something single mother, and her son, Ludo. Ludo is a very intelligent child. He reads Greek when he's 4. He learns Arabic, and Sibylla as well is an extremely intelligent woman who is working at a not so fancy job in order to provide for herself and her child. The story alternates in point of view from Sibylla's point of view in the beginning, when Ludo is only about 4 or 5, and Ludo's perspective, and as the novel progresses, it spans about 5 or 6 years. When Ludo gets a little bit older, in his early teens, his voice becomes more prominent. The title is from a movie that Sibylla and her son watch a lot of times, and that's The Seven Samurais. And the gist of the story is that Ludo doesn't know who his father is. His mother won't tell him. So eventually Ludo finds out. He's quite disappointed about the person, and then he goes looking for alternative fathers. So it's a book that is very postmodern in structure. You have these long quotations from obscure books. You have pages of Arabic, how do you say that? Signs, alphabet, that's the word, thank you, alphabet, when Ludo learns Arabic. I don't normally like that at all. I'm not a big fan, if you're following me, you know that. I'm absolutely not a big fan of child narrators. I'm not a fan of books that have very little plot, that use a lot of literary or cultural references, because I always feel, the author just wants to show off. So there's all these things that if you tell me, or if you told me before what was in the book, I would have said that's not for me. I was wrong. It really blew me away. I skim read some of these passages that I just mentioned, the quotations, but the style, the language, the ideas behind the book, the relationship between the mother and her child, the way Ludo develops, the the idea of an ideal father. I just loved it. I don't think it's for everyone. I think if you're interested in the book, because it's also quite a big book, more than 500 pages, I think you should, download a sample and just read the first 10 or 15 pages and then see whether that the style and the voice suits you. But for me, it was the biggest surprise of this month. And the second book I want to talk to you about is a nonfiction book that really, the book that I thought about the most after I finished it. And that is Naomi Wolf's nonfiction account of feminism and the future of feminism, published in 1993. Naomi Wolf thought about events that happened or that coalesced at the beginning of the 1990s. You had the Anita Hill hearings in 1991 when Clarence Thomas was supposed to go onto the Supreme Court bench, which eventually he did. You had quite a couple of high-profile rape cases, by which I mean men of fame and name and fame accused and tried and convicted of rape. And then you had the election in 1992 and an astonishing, quote-unquote, number of women were elected to the US Senate, and 1992 was called the Year of the Women. Now, Naomi Wolf took these three separate events to think about the future. And her conclusion is that this is a watershed moment in feminist history and in the journey to equality of women, and everything will change now. Well, it didn't. On the contrary. And why I thought about this book so much is because I read a lot. If you follow me, you know that I read a lot about, feminism after the 2016 presidential election, the Me Too movement, the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, and it seemed like history really repeated itself, because all three topics were just as extremely similar to the topics in 1993 when this book was published. You had a Supreme Court judge on the nomination accused of sexual assault. You had an outcry because of rape cases or sexual assault or sexual harassment, the Me Too movement, and you had election, and in this instance, the election, not only the Trump election, but you had the midterms in 2018, where an extraordinary number of women was elected to the House of Representatives. So when I read about now and how many people think it's a watershed moment and everything will change after Me Too and the election of these women, and I am doubtful, because if you read this, you will see that not much has changed after all these watershed moments. So that's why this book really kept me thinking about what will happen in the future. If you're interested in the history of feminism, this is certainly an interesting book to read, but because of Naomi Wolf's projections that she makes for the future, it's also quite outdated. The third and final book in my tops is a book that I was gifted from Shawn, over at Shawn the Book Maniac. I hauled this book at, I think, mid of February or something, and that is Helen Humphrey's novel The Lost Garden, published in 2002. Helen Humphreys is a Canadian writer whom I've never heard of, never read anything. Shame on me, but Shawn is slowly but surely trying to educate me, on the Canadian literature scene. And this book was, in a way, a similar experience as I had with The Last Samurai, because if you had told me extensively what this book is about, I would have said that's not for me. The book is set in 1941 during the Blitz, and the main character is Gwen Davis, a 35-year-old single woman, a gardener, who moves from London to Devonshire in order to be the head gardener on a big estate, the Mosel, and she is supposed to supervise the so-called land girls. They are to plant potatoes and vegetables for the soldiers, for the war effort. We follow Gwen with her encounters with the land girls, one in particular whose name is Jane, who has a fiancé who is missing in action, and they are close to the estate. There are also Canadian soldiers stationed, one of which, Captain Rayleigh, becomes a close friend to Gwen. But like I said, if you had told me more about the book, this is not a book that I normally like. It's for 70% about gardening. I don't care for gardening at all. It's also a book with very little plot, and you know how much I'm plot-oriented. But the language of the book, the writing, is so incredibly, immensely, astonishingly beautiful that it just blew me completely away. And it's a sad story, and it's a very emotionally, at least for me, it was really emotionally effective, the story. And it's a wonderful read. I'm really so grateful to Shawn and his mother, because this book was gifted to me by Shawn's mother, that I finally read it, and I'm certainly gonna read the rest of Helen Humphrey's work, who, by the way, was originally a poet. She published poetry before she ventured into fiction, and that shows. The language is gorgeous. So I highly recommend this one, even if you are like me, not into gardening at all. And then on to the flops. I always pick 3 tops and 2 flops so that the tops outweigh the flops in a month, if you get my drift. Anyway, my first flop is my first DNF of this year, and that is Kia Cawthron's immense novel, more than 800 pages, The Casa Cross, the Magnet Carta, published in 2016. I talked about how much, I'm looking forward to this book in one of my book hauls, because Kia Cawthron is a playwright of one of my favorite TV series, The Wire. And so I was really looking forward to this book, and I read it as a buddy read together with Shawn, and about 30 or 40% in, we held hands and we bailed together, so we DNF'd it. It's the story about 2 sets of brothers, 2 white brothers in Alabama and 2 black brothers in Baltimore, and we follow them from their childhood, early teens, into their adulthood. So it spans 40 years. It begins in the 1940s, when both sets of brothers are children, and then I never made it to much of the adulthood because we bailed. It's an interesting topic, and there is supposed to be a very dramatic clash between those 2 sets of brothers, which I never experienced because I DNF'd it before. But what really made me just want to stop reading was the writing style. It's written for 80 or 90% in dialogue, but just like internal dialogue, and it's all in dialect and vernacular that is hard for me to read, but that's something that it's just me. But this constant stream of dialogue without any breathing moment for me as a reader, it really exhausted me completely. And I stopped caring about the story. And then in addition, also, even though the scenes that are described through those dialogues are in and of themselves interesting, there is not much happening, at least not in the first 300 pages. So there was not a plot that, kept me interested and kept me going. And I just had to abandon it. There's still, I'm still interested enough in the book that I'm not discarding it forever. I might pick it up and then maybe I'll listen to the audiobook in conjunction with reading it. I'm not sure yet, but for now, it was just not a reading experience that I could go on with. Pity, but that's the way it goes. And then, as per usual, we end with the book that irked me the most. And for those of you who follow me on Twitter, it was a book that I really literally threw across the room, my living room, when I finished it. So there you go, Nashwa, because you asked me which book was that. And that is Motherhood by Canadian writer Sheila Heti, published in 2018. Sheila Heti was known to me sort of because I heard of her book, How Shall a Person Be, published a couple of years ago, which made quite an impression, but I hadn't read her. And this book, Motherhood, explores the question whether or not Sheila Heti wants to become a mother, whether she wants to have children. It's called a novel, but it's a really very thinly disguised autobiographical memoir-ish story with very little story. That's the first thing that I didn't like. I mean, call it a memoir if you're talking about your own experience. What the hell? But anyway, why did this book irk me so much? I'm not a mother myself, but I'm interested in, especially younger women, and Sheila Heti is quite a bit younger than I am. She's now in her 40s, beginning of her 40s. So I'm interested in how young women look at their lives and ponder the question whether or not to have children. That's why I was interested in the book. But the way this topic was treated in the novel really made it just rubbed me completely the wrong way. It was as if you were constantly told that motherhood is the default position. In other words, the book in those 300 and something pages tries to find reasons why not to become a mother. Even more, find excuses why not to become a mother, because the motherhood is what you are supposed to do as a woman. That irked me. I think that's a position that I'm not interested in reading about. I think it's boring, and I also think it's not my political position. And then in the end, Sheila Heti, if you Google her, you know that she doesn't have children, but she found an excuse, and that's because she's an artist. So she produces something for the world, even though it's not children. Anyway, a lot of people love this book. I know, but for me it was just an annoying and not very well written a book about why on earth wouldn't you want to be a mother? Not for me. Anyway, so these were my tops and flops in February. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, talk to me down in the comments about the books I am talking about or about any other book, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye-bye.